So as a podcaster, you have to be comfortable in your own skin, be unapologetically you, and just be authentic to who you are. You don't want to try to be Joe Rogan. You don't want to try to be Ed Milet. You don't want to try to be anyone else. You don't want their show. People are hanging out with you. If they want to hang out with Joe Rogan, they'll go hang out with Joe Rogan. And a lot of people do. Now, I think we can listen to other podcasts and learn some stylistic things. But at the end of the day, like, it's got to be just who you are.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster, it's your host, Adam Adams, and I'm stoked for this episode because the person that we are interviewing, Matt O'Neill, his podcast is doing a lot of things. You can also see that in the metrics of the podcast, how it's getting in front of his right people, how those people are commenting, rating, reviewing his show. And we're going to get into what he's doing and how he's doing it, because that way you can also grow your podcast over time. You stop making the same mistakes as practically 90% of the people out there. And Matt's doing it right. So his show is actually called Good Mood Revolution. Not Revelation. Good Mood Revolution.
They're both good, Adam. They're both Revolution, Revelation. I like them both.
Yeah. I don't know why I said that. This is my dyslexic brain. But yeah, no, I'm stoked to have you. I want to share with the listener one of the things that happened on your show, and then I'm going to ask you about it. So one of the things that I noticed at the beginning of the episode with Matt and Ange, they are a yoga couple who wrote a book that you read and loved. And the way that you started out that episode, just prior to getting into the actual episode, I think you record that after. Well, you can tell us in a second. You caught my attention perfectly. You grabbed my attention. It made me say, dang, this is for me. Dang, I need to listen to this. This sounds like a good episode. I got lucky on selecting this that I wanted to check out of his show. And I want to find out what you're thinking, how you go about writing that prequel to each episode. Would you mind just jumping in right there?
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you're somebody that studies the science of podcasting. So what high praise to receive. I appreciate that, man. I'm always wanting to think of the hook. And I've got a marketing background, and the subject line of your email has to be the best 3 or 4 words of the entire email. In the old days, we had newspaper advertisements. And so the headline of your newspaper advertisement needed to be the most important thing. I've been on billboards. So in a billboard, you have to tell your story, like very short, very concise. Podcast is a 40-minute platform. My show's 40 minutes. And I'm like, I started out, if you listen to a couple of years ago when I first started out, I would say, oh, here's our guest. Let me tell you for 2 minutes about all the cool things they've done. Yeah. And then I'd say, oh, how are you? And then they'd say how they were. And how boring of an intro. And so I switched it up and decided to lead with a hook. And the hook is going to be something that's going to punch you in the face about this episode that's really interesting. The more controversial it can be, the better. So I want to take a contrarian view if I can. I teach happiness. I teach people how to be happier. So it might be, if I had an anger expert on the show, a contrarian view would be why being angry is actually your path to feeling happier. That would be interesting. You'd be like, wow, okay, so anger could make me happier. I'm curious about that. Let me learn more. And so when I get done with the episode, I just recorded it. I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll type in, I'll be like, hey, here's what we talked about. Give me some controversial, contrarian ways I could spin this episode. And I'll say, give me 10. And then I'll just read the 10. And then one of them will show up and I'll say, I like that. And then I'll record a little 45-second intro about the episode that way.
Okay. So you record an episode with somebody or a couple, for example. And then when it's done, you tell ChatGPT, this is what we talked about. how are you doing that? Is it copying and pasting the entire transcript, or how do you tell ChatGPT what you're talking about?
No, I just know 5 bullet points.
Okay.
I'm just doing that from memory. I'm not throwing in a transcript.
So you throw in the bullet points that you remember that you mentioned, and then you say, what is a controversial way to approach this? Or would you go back into that and say, this is what I say to ChatGPT?
Yeah, I'll say I need a hook. I need a lead. I need something powerful and punchy. Give me 10 different hooks about promoting this episode that could be a little bit edgy, maybe controversial. Sometimes they'll come up with stuff that I don't like, and then I'll have to give it a different prompt. Like, hey, give me something exciting.
Yeah.
I'll say, forget the edgy, controversial spin. Give me something exciting, and give me 10 of those. And eventually, ChatGPT is going to give me something that I can riff on.
All right. So with that episode, the one with Matt and Ange, what do you remember how did it go for that? What did you say to ChatGPT? These are the things that it's about. And what were some maybe good and bad like examples that you might be able to remember?
I didn't actually use ChatGPT on that one.
Oh,
I already had the hook. The hook was,
your wife.
if the honeymoon period is going to be the best period of your marriage. That was the hook. And that's actually false.
Okay.
And so
You said that in that hook, that the honeymoon period is false? I missed it. I heard the whole thing and I was like, dude, this is pulling me in. I love this. This is great.
Yeah, so sometimes the lead is just obvious to me.
Okay.
And so in that episode, the lead was really obvious. And so I just went with it. But if it's not an obvious lead, I got to go find one.
And moving on, you've got pretty close to 100 ratings and reviews on the show. I think practically all 5-star. What did you do to get people to, what's the word for it? It's social proofing. What did you get people to do to give you that social proofing on your show? Did you ask for it or what?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's a short answer. Great. I should have asked an open-ended question.
So again, marketing, Google reviews are very important. In this case, Apple reviews and Spotify. Spotify's big too, man. I think we got 65 or so Spotify reviews. So
Okay.
I go to the guest and I say, man, it's really an honor to have you here. It would mean a lot if you could just write your honest feelings about the show.
Yeah.
And I always say, I don't say, give me a 5-star review. I say, I want your honest opinion. You were a guest on the show. You may have listened to a few episodes. You may just know me and know the conversation we had. Give me your honest opinion. It'll help other people find it. And that's how I started out getting reviews. Now, of course, some are organic as well. When I guested on other people's shows, I went and proactively gave them a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. And I would say, man, I just gave you a review on your show. I love growing shows and reviews are a big way to do it. If you have a moment and you want to check out my show and leave a review, that'd be awesome. And I'll leave in the links.
I've mentioned to our listener more than once that if you're going to ask for reviews, you should ask for an honest review and not a 5-star review. And so I thought it was interesting because you're the first other person besides me who's said that. And I want to get your full feelings on why. Because think about our listener who's going to be asking for reviews. Naturally, they would say, I want a 5-star review. So why, Matt, why are you not just saying, give me a 5-star? Give me the pros and cons there.
It just sounds cheesy. It's coerced. I don't know. It feels better to me to just say, I just want your authentic feelings. And I feel better making the ask when I just want your honest opinion.
Yeah. And what I've noticed is out of about 100, you have like about 99 perfect 5-star ratings. So you've asked it all of these times and it continues to be 5 stars. Why do you think that is?
So before I get on any show, I send the person I'm going to be talking with love and blessings. Adam, you were blessed before I saw you. Okay. It puts me in a heart space of being really honored to be with the person I'm with and in tune with what they care about and wanting to make a positive difference any way I can. Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how they made you feel. And I just think that I'm coming to each show wanting the person I'm talking with to feel really honored and respected and cared for. And so then their honest opinion about how it was to be around me is usually pretty good. So that's a tip, man. So this is a how to podcast. I always research my guest. I always research my host. I'm listening to your show before I get on it. I'm taking notes. I've got 2 pages of notes of what I'm going to talk about today before I even, talk with you, because I want to have a game plan about how I can add value to your audience and how I can talk about what I do that's going to make a difference for your people. That puts me in a position to make you think I'm a good person to review highly.
Yeah. And I like how you said something to the effect of it's cheesy to ask for a 5-star review. I think it does feel, to me at least, it feels cheesy to say it. And the other thing is when I'm on the receiving end, if you ask me to give you a 5-star review, I might not even review you because I want to give you a 5-star. I want to, but I might not even do it because I feel like the 5-star didn't come from me, that it came from you, and that it can't be authentic anymore. I'm like, no, I'm not even going to write a review because he's the one who told me to do a 5-star. Yeah. But if you say, can I get an honest review? I'm like, hell yeah, man. And I jump in and start writing and it becomes a 5-star anyway.
And it's usually the words they say are better.
There you go. I like that. Going into your 2 pages of notes, do you have a couple that kind of come to the top, the cream that's rising to the top that you'd like to share with a new podcast listener?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're hanging out with you. This is a hangout session. So the person listening right now, they're hanging out with us. It's just us and them. And think about the people you like to hang out with. For me, I want to hang out with authentic people. I want somebody who's like comfortable in their own skin, that is unapologetically themselves, that's not trying to be someone else. Okay, so as a podcaster, you have to be comfortable in your own skin, be unapologetically you, and just be authentic to who you are. You don't want to try to be Joe Rogan. You don't want to try to be Ed Milet. You don't want to try to be anyone else. You don't want their show. People are hanging out with you. If they want to hang out with Joe Rogan, they'll go hang out with Joe Rogan. And a lot of people do. Now, I think we can listen to other podcasts and learn some stylistic things, but at the end of the day, like, it's got to be just who you are. That's why they show up. They show up for you as the host. The other thing, and this is something I constantly think about all the time, if we're teaching something, and most podcasts are teaching things, we're either entertaining and teaching. But if we're teaching something, people want to learn from vulnerable people. I hear a lot of podcast hosts and guests, like, they have to be the expert, meaning they always have to know the answer, and they're a little bit timid to share anything vulnerable. Here's the reality. I will learn from you way better if you say, I messed that up big time. This is what I learned from it. This is how I got out of it. Instead of, oh, I'm always perfect, and then just do like I do. I'm like, man, that's not even true. So being vulnerable, and with that, stories are that's the magic. So
now, is stories the third thing, or is stories part of number 2?
Stories are the third thing. And it really should have led with it. So everyone wants to be entertained. And people say, oh, everyone's attention spans are so short. No, they're not. Shoot, man. I'll binge a TV show for 5 hours straight. Mm-hmm. Like, literally, I have a 5-hour long attention span if your story is that good.
I did that last night, by the way, Matt.
What did you see?
You had to put me on the spot. I don't remember the name, but we watched several episodes of one. Yeah. And then we went, the second one was called Netflix Chaos. Yeah. Anyway, ended up watching that until it was completely over. So yeah, we spent hours there. So you're right. It's not our attention span. That's interesting.
And so if we see people bounce off our podcast quick, maybe we didn't have a good enough hook at the beginning, which we've already talked about. But I want to go hook, and then a very short little, hey, this is what the podcast is about, and then immediately into story. And here's the thing with story. All story, like a really good story, has 3 parts. It starts with a crisis, and then it goes into a struggle, and then it goes into a resolution. So if we always want to become a better storyteller. And crisis, that's like something happened. It wasn't great. The stakes are high. So if you can come up with a story where we got some crisis and we got high stakes, like there's a lot invested in this. I was sweating it. And then I really wanted a great resolution. I'm trying this, it wasn't working. I'm trying this, it wasn't working. I'm trying this, it wasn't working. And then finally we end it with, here's the resolution. And this is the aha. Like I ended up becoming a transformed person because of this whole thing. That's the 3-act story. It's been around for thousands of years. We can learn from a 3-act story. And if we start, so I want to go with a hook and immediately in a story. And if it's my guest, before I start recording, I'm like, hey, what's your best story? And I'll have them be primed up. I'm like, hey, could you walk me through it as if it's fresh to you and you haven't told it 100 times? And I want to be on the edge of my seat. Don't tell me the whole thing now. I want to be on the edge of my seat. Walk me through it. And then if the guest starts telling this amazing story, it could be 5-10 minutes. I won't lose a single listener through it.
Yeah.
I've got an episode tomorrow, and the guest is Rhonda Britton. She wrote a book called Fearless Living. This book was #1 New York Times bestseller. She was on Oprah telling this story. She opens the book with just this crazy true life story. And I'm on the edge of my seat reading her book. I'm going to have her tell that story tomorrow on my podcast. Once they're hooked in with the story, think again, Netflix, you're watching the show Chaos. I'm sure it had all the elements. I'm sure there was crisis and struggle and you're wondering what's going to happen next. How's it all going to come together? How's it going to work out for them? That's the elements of any good TV show or any good book or any good movie or any good podcast. And so once we hook them in and they're on the edge of their seat, like what's going to happen? Is it going to be okay? Is it going to work out? Then we can teach. Now, at this point, we're like, yeah, this big crisis happened. It was crazy. And I tried all these things to get better, but then I fell into drugs and alcohol because it was such a painful thing and then lost my way. And I didn't know if I was going to make it out. And then all of a sudden, I had this epiphany. Somebody gave me a book. I learned this thing and then I applied that. And then everything changed and then the whole world got better. Now, here's what I learned. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can teach 5 points. And at that point, they're so invested that they actually learn the 5 points.
Yeah.
And then they come back. So they come back the next week. They're like, all right, I want to be entertained again and I want to learn again.
We've mentioned on the show before, hook story offer. And I'm curious, you have a similar framework so far. The hook is the thing that gets their attention. The story, and I love how you say the 3-act story with the crisis, the struggle, and the resolution. What happens at the end after the story? Is there something you do after the story is wrapped up on your podcast?
No.
Okay.
I don't. And I saw your episode about how to end a podcast episode. And I went to play it and it said because it was explicit, I had to sign in to Apple and I didn't get to listen to it.
Oh my gosh, how fun.
So teach me at the end of an episode, what do we do? I read the notes of that episode and it said you need some type of CTA, some type of call to action to end it.
But yeah, on this show, we've mentioned to the listener a few times to end with any type of offer or call to action, meaning that you want to have them do a thing that typically benefits them to whatever they learn. So you got your hook. Let's use your one episode about that we had Matt and Ange. Let's use that as an example. And they are, I think, marriage coaches. Is that true? Marriage coaches?
So it's Matt and Ash. They are authors.
Okay.
They're and influencers. And so they primarily are teachers.
But on this, they wrote a book about marriage relationships, and your hook included how your wife and you sometimes have fought and you got vulnerable about how you were angry and how sometimes she felt like she had a tiptoe. So you did that as a hook and it got me. And then you started going into the story, which was done really well. At the end, you might say to your listener, something to the effect of, now that you've heard this, I challenge you to be nicer to your wife. Or after you've heard this, I challenge you to try these 3 things. So when you wrap it up with your 5 bullet points, the 5 things that you learned out of the episode, you might say to your listener, now that you've learned this and this, it's time to XYZ.
Put it into action.
Yeah, put it into action. There are other types of CTAs or calls to action or offers. You could say, give me a call. We can go through this, especially if it's a solo episode. If you are teaching somebody how to be happier, how to stay in a good mood, how to be positive, and these are the 3 things. And if one of them is holding you back, don't worry. Give me a call. I actually will leave my link to my calendar in the show notes, and I will open up a few hours just for my listeners. Something like that.
That's tight.
A call to action.
Yeah, that's good.
So you don't do a call to action.
As of tomorrow.
As of this one, who is coming on the show tomorrow again? What's that lady?
Rhonda Britton.
And what's her story? What you said she had a big story.
Yeah, it's huge. She became a reality TV star in the early, in the 2005 range. And her show, I never heard of the show, but it had millions of watchers, daytime television. She was a life coach to people, and people who needed life coaching lived on campus. And she was like the guru that would fix their mess. And it had multiple seasons. I don't even remember. I don't know what the show is. I never saw it. But her story, she starts out just talking about how her mom was always her idol. And she's telling this story about how her mom was going on a date. She put on this nice dress, and then she had gotten Rhonda a white dress. And so Rhonda had this beautiful white dress on, and her mom's putting on her makeup and doing Rhonda's hair, and they're about to go out. And they're going out with her ex-husband, who's Rhonda's dad. And it's Father's Day. And so even though they're divorced, she's like, all right, we're all going to go out. We're going to be a nice family together. And so they're looking their best. They're looking their best for their dad. And he shows up, and he's looking good too. And he says, hey, come on out here. And she comes out, and he pulls a shotgun out and shoots her mom right in front of her.
Holy cow.
Then he runs at Rhonda with the shotgun. And so she thinks that she's going to die. She just watched her idol shot, murdered in front of her. And he falls down on his knees, and he shoots himself. And she's the only one that witnesses it. She was 16. And now her book is called Fearless Living. And her point is that from that traumatic experience, she became fearful of everything, of fully expressing herself, of doing anything. It makes a lot of sense. And so then she falls into all kinds of struggle, which is what you would do if you're 16 and you witness something horrific like that. It ends up okay for her. So in the end, the resolution ends, no one wants to experience what she experienced. But this is what's crazy, is that every single story, if we allow it to, can enrich us and turn us into something even greater than we could have been without the struggle. And it's beautiful to know that even the most traumatic things can turn into the most beautiful things. And for Rhonda, after struggles and alcoholism and different things that you would imagine would happen after you experience something like that, she had an awakening where she said, I don't want to live fearful anymore. And she became somebody who started to live fearlessly, meaning she started to live authentic to her true self and then doing what she felt was going to make the world a better place. And when she learned how to get out of that, then she started to coach other people how to get past their trauma. And she's healed, at this point, thousands of people.
I love it.
It wouldn't have happened without that big story. So that was her big story.
Imagine if you shared that with us, me and the listener, in a different way. Imagine as if you shared it by leaving out some of those details, by leaving out the crisis, by leaving out the struggle, and only saying, oh yeah, tomorrow I have this lady and she actually teaches people how to get over their fear. And that's what I think a lot of people listening might be doing.
Yeah.
They skip to the end they forget those other two pieces that you mentioned, which is establish the crisis, the struggle. You're talking about how this is her idol, how they were getting ready. Mom was putting the makeup on. She was getting excited. She saw her dad, blah, 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 blah. Come out here. If we heard that without all of those pieces, we wouldn't have remembered it. We wouldn't have cared about the person. We seem to care about them when we do those three things that you mentioned. When we are authentic, when we are vulnerable, and when we use those stories. So I love the lesson here. Is there another thing that like you have in your 2 pages of notes that you believe would help a podcast, somebody who's like thinking to themselves, I want to podcast. I would love to podcast. I have been told that I should podcast. I wonder if podcasts would grow my business. If you have that listener right now, the one that's about to launch a podcast, thinking about starting a podcast, is there something you could share with that person right now?
Yes. That calling is somebody's miracle. And if you don't follow through, if you've got a podcast and you don't become better at this and study it and continue to listen to Adam and what he's teaching all of us and taking notes, if you don't get better, then the person who needs your miracle isn't going to hear it. And if you never start your podcast, even though everyone's telling you you should, there's a listener out there who needs your miracle that will never get it. So that's why we're doing this. We're doing this to change people's lives. And sure, selfishly, it can help your business, but typically I found that selfish pursuits don't last and pod fade. If we're just doing it just to grow our own business, there's a lot of easier ways to grow our own business. It's when we truly connect to the difference we're making in people's lives that we can push through the challenging parts.
I like your thoughts on this and keeping it to where you're supporting somebody else. And I've got a question for you that I'm hoping you can just answer honestly. I'm hoping you can answer not the way you think I want you to answer, but just genuinely what you really truly think.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that listen to a podcast on podcasting want to be better at podcasting because they want it to be able to somehow feed with what they're already doing. There's one of two reasons. They either want to basically give back or serve that person, or they want to make money. So they either want to monetize or they want to inspire. Can you agree with that? If they either want to be there for that person or make money. Do you believe that if our listener just listens, really just listens to the podcast, if they can get all of the value from you, or if they should work with you? I know that seems like a leading question, but I want to know your true feeling on that.
I always aim to give everything I've got. I don't want to hold anything back. And I have gained so much from the books I've read and the podcasts I've listened to and the conferences I've attended. And then I've hired coaches. And I've gained so much from coaches. And when I'm podcasting, I want to give everything I've got. I want it to be whole and complete. And on this episode, I have no tricks I'm not telling. It's like, I've learned it from you. So my answer is I think that for some people, they're going to listen and they're going to get everything they need. And then for some people, I've got a good call to action at the end. I say, hey, if you're struggling with this, you need to go deeper. We can have a conversation about it. Maybe coaching is right for you. For some people, maybe that's going to be the way that they get involved. Matt Ash, who we're talking about in this episode, I read their first book, The Inner Work. It blew my mind. And I'm like, I have to learn more. And they had a podcast. I listened to the podcast. And on the podcast, he said, hey, I'm doing this hero's journey coaching. I was like, I have to learn more from this guy. And so I went onto his website and applied for his hero journey coaching. That was the progression. Read the book, listened to the podcast, applied for coaching, and I coached with him for 2 years.
Oh, I did not realize that.
And that's not going to be that's not every book I read. I read a lot of books, but sometimes, and not every, Like, it's crazy. If you can get in access of somebody, there's some people you just can't touch. Like, I couldn't get coaching from Tony Robbins. It's not an option. Maybe it is for a certain amount of tens of millions, but that's not an option for me at this point. So sometimes if there's somebody at a super high level and you get a chance to talk with them, sometimes it's worth it to take it.
Yeah. I like the idea of that some people, because you give everything you can on the podcast and intentionally, you're not holding back. And I know so many coaches and consultants, educators in different spaces that say how important it is to hold some things close to the chest.
I think it's silly, man.
There you go.
There's no secret, man. Information is cheap. Anything I want to know, I can Google. I can watch a video on it. There's so much information out there. So there's nothing you could hold back that I couldn't figure out. It's like, just going back to the example about Matt and Ash, the book, he didn't hold back. It was mind blowing. Podcast, he's not holding back. And it's because I was like, it was good. That's why I wanted to coach with him. I'm like, man, if they're this good, there's got to be more. There is. There's a tremendous amount of depth there. And then he came out with the next book, which is what I just recorded that episode on. And it was so good. But these are people who are dedicating their lives to teaching. And it's, a lot of times when we're just doing a podcast to make money, which is, you said, hey, usually people make money or they're trying to educate or they're doing it to inspire. If we're just doing it selfishly, it's not going to be that good because we're not obsessed about how I'm going to change the lives of the people I'm talking to. So I would say if we're in a podcast just to make money, if we're doing anything just to make money, it's a waste of time. This is Jim Rohn, really famous, inspiring speaker. And he said, the amount of money you get is in proportion to the amount of value you add to the world. If you want to make more money, become more valuable. You become more valuable by giving more value. So the more value we give to our show, that's being obsessed about our listener. I'm so freaking obsessed about the listener. I know you are, Adam. You're like, you told me before I even got on the show, this is who's listening. This is what they want. This is what they care about. You're so obsessed about making sure they're served. You're making sure I know who they are. So that I can serve them. So if we're podcasting and we want to make more money, be obsessed about the person listening and the money will come.
I've got a question on by the way, I want to ask you if on your podcast, how do you feel, because you are adding as much value as you can, and you do, I think, occasionally get somebody as a client by listening to your podcast.
Yeah.
How does that transition work on your show?
I have a commercial in this show.
Okay.
And it's a 45-second commercial. And it just says, hey, if you're looking to go deeper in happiness coaching and you're looking for some one-on-one help with whatever your situation is, reach out to me.
I love it. And with happiness coaching, what does it look like for the person listening today if they're thinking, oh, I like this guy. I'd like to work with this guy. He seems great. What does it look like? Are you going to hypnotize me? Is it like just another psychiatrist? What is happiness coaching compared to other things that I can think of?
Yeah, it's not a good spot to go from just being introduced to me to then saying, oh, let's go ahead and figure out if I should coach on happiness with Matt. The two good entry points are to listen to the Good Mood Revolution podcast, because I'm doing happiness coaching every single week for free. And I'm giving everything I've got. So every single week, if the person listening right now says, hey, I do want to be happier in my life, and who doesn't, then you can get a weekly dose of happiness just by listening to the show. And then, like I said, with Matt and Ash, if at that point you're saying, I want to go even deeper, and then you can say, maybe there's more depth here. The other entry point is the book. And I wrote a book by the same name, The Good Mood Revolution. And in that book, I talk about how there's 8 negative moods. There's only 8. So if we're unhappy, it's only one of 8 ways. And I describe what those 8 negative moods are with story and then with how to get out of it. And then the second half of the book is how to choose 8 better ways of being. And so that book is going to teach everything that I would teach in the coaching. But again, there's so much more depth. I ended up writing a 500-page book on how to be happy. and I edited it down to 160 pages. I wanted every single page to be like, I want people to fly through this book and just every page be so deep and profound. But that means I've got 350 more pages of book that didn't show up in the book. And that's what you get when you end up coaching with somebody.
Out of those 8 things, what is a highly common negative mood that our listener today might experience? What's one of them?
We get them all, man. You and I, and there's no secret here. The most common, we're talking right now about imposter syndrome. Is my show going to be good enough? That's the first negative mood. It's shame, this feeling that maybe I'm not enough. And that's a really destructive mood. It's going to stop us from pursuing our dreams. So that's going to be a pretty common one for podcasters. And then the other one is going to be anxiety and fear. That's another negative mood we could experience. Hey, I don't know if this is going to be good long-term, or maybe I won't make the money I need, or maybe this is a drain on my resources. That's also not going to be positive for us. So those are 2 right off the rip. But one that is going to get us in the end, if we get really good, this is the last negative mood that I talk about, and it's usually pretty sneaky, is pride. When we end up having some success, we could start to read our own press clippings and then believe that we're maybe a little bit better than everyone else. And then we stop learning and we stop growing, and pride comes before the fall. So we never actually want to be stuck in pride. Here, I'm like learning from you on this episode how I can become a better podcaster. I'm going to PodFest in a couple months. I feel like becoming better is a mountain without a top. And that's going to be one of the keys to continually being a happy person, is continually growing and not being stuck.
Yeah. What we've learned and talked about some really cool stuff in this episode. I loved how you talked about the hook. Like you talked about the hook and the story a lot. The hook being something that punches you in the face or is contrarian, and how you go about doing that when you go to ChatGPT and you prompt it and you get like those 10 different things. And if you didn't get them good enough, you do it again, you prompt it differently. And then you pull from those 10 and you select how you're going to start an episode. It's interesting that for me, I start an episode by starting an episode, and I love how you do yours. You record the episode, you pull all the great content, and then at the end, you say, now we need to get the best hook from this. And you give the 5 big bullet points, and then you get that. And you mentioned that the hook should make that person say, I'm curious about what's in here. I'm curious about the rest. I'm curious about what I can learn. And you mentioned an email subject line, being the subject line is the most important piece. Long time ago, I was trying to do fix and flips and wholesales for real estate investing. Probably the hardest type of real estate investing. Just buy a rental, buy an apartment, easier. But in this fix and flip wholesale thing, they talked about something similar, and I want to bring it up now. You said that the subject line is the most important piece to the email. The hook is, for example, one of the most important pieces to your podcast. And they were talking about how the envelope that you mail to this person, it has just one job. The envelope only has one job. It's to get the person to open the envelope. So what do you do to the envelope? Some of the tricks that they would do is they would make it look like an invitation instead of a letter. They would put like a warning sign on it, like your house is going to do this. And so that they get curious somehow. I'm not recommending sleazy salesmanship to the listener. I'm just saying that the envelope had purpose. What was the purpose of the envelope? It was to open it. They would sometimes put something inside, like a coin, a pen, or something bulky to get us curious on what is that thing. And so we open it. And then the headline at the top has just one thing that it needs you to do, and it's to read the rest. And then reading the rest only has one thing that they want you to do, and that's to call you. And when you get on the phone with them for the first time, you only have one thing that you're looking for, and that's to meet in person. So you don't try to complicate it with all of the things. You don't just give all the things all at once. You give the piece that gets to the piece. And I think of that when you're talking about the email, the main thing is the subject line is to get them to open the email. And I'm sure you have a thing that you want that email to say, or I'm sure you have the podcast wanting to give a certain amount of value. And you've got your call to action, and it's not at the end for you. It's where is it in the beginning, in the middle? Where's your?
It's in the middle. It's in the middle.
I like that better, actually. I like the middle better because some people on their podcast, and it might be our listener today, they throw an ad at the beginning. And so before you ever get any value, you're like getting sold something. And I like it in the middle for a lot of reasons, because if it's at the beginning or the end, I'm probably going to learn how to push the fast forward a certain amount of times. If it's in the middle, I'm probably going to sit through it. I have a higher probability of listening.
I'll fast forward those ones too, though.
You will?
All right.
All right. I wonder if your listeners doing that or not. But it's interesting to just think of how the podcast does a role or a job to support your listener to grow, to get to the next step. And that the subject line and the hook, the story, the beginning of the podcast gets them to listen, and how your stories are including those three pieces, like the crisis, the struggle, and the resolution. All of these pieces support somebody to be able to grow. You also,
and then what you taught me today, I love the example of the envelope needs to get opened. The subject line needs you to read, the body needs you to call it, and then the call needs to turn into a meeting. I love that. That's exactly what we're talking about here on the podcast. But what I didn't have was what you taught me here, which is we got the hook to get you to listen more. But even before that, it's going to be, what's the podcast title?
Yeah, good.
And then what's the first sentence of your opening paragraph? They are scanning before they're like, am I going to listen to this one? What's it about? Okay, if the title got me, what's the first sentence? So those are the first two most important. If we're only going to work on two pieces of content, it would be the title first and then that first sentence in the body. That would get them to even give it a try. Then the hook would say, am I going to listen a little bit further? And then the story is going to get them.
Yeah.
But what I didn't have was to the call to action at the end of, all right, now you've learned all of this. I need you to take it and apply it. I was doing that years ago. Like a couple years ago, I was saying, hey, here's your challenge. And I had a challenge each week. And I would say, here's the challenge. You need to go and do this week, and then we'll see you next week. And now you've inspired me to do something like that again. So I appreciate that.
Another couple takeaways, the honest feedback versus the 5-star feedback, and how powerful it is to ask that way.
Do you have an AI like Otter or something that's like summarizing all this stuff for you?
I take notes. I type it. So I type it on the chat. Do you want to see it?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious how you got all this stuff. So you're like
the notes?
You're typing notes as we're talking so that you can summarize at the end of the show?
Yeah, I want to get the impactful things that you say, like the crisis, struggle, resolution, for example.
Yeah.
I want to get that. And at some point, go back and make sure that the listener hears it and understands it. I've always said hook, story, and offer just like you do, or hook and story just like you do. And my hook I've always shared it similarly to what you said. It's to grab attention. It's to get them to listen to the podcast. The story, I always had 3 parts, for example, but not the same 3 parts as yours. I love yours, the crisis, struggle, and resolution, because it reminds me of when I was watching any movie, really, any good movie, Star Wars with Luke Skywalker, and he's the hero going through, and he goes through issues and troubles, and he wants this, but this is getting in his way, and he overcomes that, but then this gets in his way. It reminds me of that story. And just like we said, if you summarized the guest who's coming on your show tomorrow by saying, oh yeah, her parents both died. Or if you went all the way to the very end and just said, yeah, she's a life coach. She helps other people get unstuck. She helps them not living in fear. But how is she qualified, or why her? What's going to make me want to listen? What makes me want to listen is feeling her getting excited about this dinner with her dad in a beautiful dress and come outside. And then I'm thinking, is she going to see?
It was so gruesome. I was shook reading that story. I was shook. Yeah, it's crazy. So what was your 3 parts of the story? Just curious.
So I was going to say, it's tell them what you're going to teach them. So in this episode, you're going to learn blah, blah, blah. So you get the hook, and I use a statistic or a question.
Yeah, it's great.
Did you know that 97% of business owners that are successful, they use paid marketing? That's like your stat.
Yeah, it's curious. I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
Then we move into the 3 parts to the story. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you wrap it up and tell them what you told them. But in the beginning, in this episode, you're going to learn the 5 ways that you can do marketing. And so now you've told them what you're going to tell them. Now you tell them with a story. Like you go through and you say, man, when I first started my business, I heard that 97% of people were marketing. They were using Facebook ads. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use Facebook ads. So I wrote my first Facebook ad and I heard that they were putting $50,000. I didn't have $50,000. I had 12. So I put $12,000 for that. And all of a sudden, nothing happened. And I was like, what the heck? My chest is like dropping. I'm freaking out because I have no more money. So that's like you getting into the story.
There's these stakes, right?
And then you say, here's the thing. I didn't do everything right when I did that. I've learned some things over time. Let me share with you what I learned. And so you go through the story. After doing it for a year, I tried this and it worked. And then I tried this, it didn't work. And you're going through that Luke Skywalker thing and you're sharing that story and the information all at the same time. And at the end, you come back with, so the 5 things that worked for me that are going to work for you when you need a market, so you can be part of the 97% most successful businesses out there, you're going to do X, Y, Z, and double X and double Y, or whatever it is.
I like the wrap up because, man, we talked about a lot of stuff. I forgot about all the stuff we talked about until you said it.
And what's cool is we can use your crisis struggle resolution idea mixed with tell them what you're going to tell them and then wrap it up idea to be able to really support a listener. Because if, for example, we've got a listener right now, like you said before, it's you, it's me, and it's our listener, our buddy. And that person, I feel we need that person to make sure that they know what the takeaway was. So during our interview today, I write down the things that I learned. When I listen to your stuff, I take down the things that I learn, and I put in things like, what's the most highly common negative mood? That was a question I wanted to ask you. And you mentioned a few things. You mentioned that one of them is just getting over ourselves to be able to even believe that we can be a podcaster, the fear, and the sneaky one, the pride. And then I want to share that toward the end. And our listener understands, hey, I got a lot of value. And then I'm going to tell them on the next episode, it's a solo episode. It's just you and me. I'm going to be pouring into you. And I have already queued up something that I know you need. Like I know from my experience being a podcaster and working with other podcasters that there's a couple things you need. And I actually made a solo episode. I'll see you there. Boom.
Mic drop.
Exactly. So that's just how I do it. But
man, I'm learning from you. And this is what's cool is you're like an expert of experts. And this is like you. And so I'm very excited that I got to have this conversation with you. I got better being on your episode. So thank you.
I'm going to keep listening to your show. And also for the listener, go and check out the show, Matt's website, any social media he wanted to share, as well as his podcast. All of those links are down in the show notes. You can go and get free coaching every single week about how to be happier. All right. And when you do, just leave him a rating review. Let him know you heard about him here. I'll see you on that next episode.
You're not alone if you're ready to either get your very first affordable microphone or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to some legit podcasting studio equipment. Because on all of the forums over the last few months, I'm seeing this all the time. Even my own personal clients that work with my team, they're ready to get that next microphone. They're asking us for it. Additionally, when I'm on discovery calls with potential clients, they're always asking for this stuff. Hey, what mic do you recommend? Hey, what lighting do you recommend? What webcam should I be using? So many questions. And so what we did, my whole team has put together a PDF so that if you're one of those people who is looking to either get your very first affordable microphone, or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to more professional podcast studio equipment, whether it's soundproofing or whatever, we've got you covered by going to growyourshow.com/PDF. And you can download the PDF for free, or right there on the webpage is everything that you would have, and you don't need to download the PDF. Either way, just go to growyourshow.com/PDF, which will put you to the podcasting equipment that me and my team have personally vetted. I'll see you on the next episode.